imagine for a second, right, that you are living in this tiny, cramped studio apartment.
Right. Just a really small space.
Exactly. And you're eating ramen noodles for dinner every single night, just scraping by. But simultaneously, you're transferring $4,000 a month to an ex-partner.
Who is, according to the specific scenario, currently vacationing in Bali.
Right, Wally. And you're being told by the legal system that if you miss a single one of those payments, you will literally go to jail.
I mean, to a lot of people, that scenario sounds like dystopian fiction.
Oh, totally. It sounds like some wildly exaggerated edge case, right?
Yeah, but according to the author we are examining today, it's not an anomaly at all. It's actually a feature of a system operating exactly as it was designed to.
Which is just a staggering premise.
You know, it really is. I mean, we are looking at a worldview that completely rejects the idea of a shared social contract.
It sees modern society as this, like, highly sophisticated extraction mechanism.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we're going to tear into today.
Welcome to the Deep Dives, everyone. Before we go any further, please take a second to like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep bringing you these massive explorations.
It does.
So today, we are looking at an intensely controversial, highly provocative new ebook. It's titled Post-Traumatic Growth, Walk Through Hell and Out the Other Side, and it's by Conrad Riker.
And honestly, to truly grasp the raw intensity of this text, you should really head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy the book for yourself.
Yeah, you have to see the primary source. And you can also follow the author at Conrad on Riker on Substack.
Right, at Conrad Riker to see how his theories are playing out in real time.
But we need to pause here because we have a very important disclaimer before we start unpacking these theories.
Yes, a massive disclaimer.
This book contains highly politically charged, deeply polarizing content.
It really sits right at the center of the men's rights movement and the red-pilled manosphere.
So we need to be absolutely crystal clear on this point for you listening. We are not taking sides today.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, and we are not condemning them either. Our mission here is to act as completely impartial guides.
We're just here to report, right?
Yeah.
To unpack and analyze the underlying logic and the specific ideas contained in the original source material.
Exactly. The goal is for you to understand the architecture of this cultural phenomenon. You know, what drives it, how it views the world, and the specific strategies it prescribes.
So let's unpack this.
Okay, let's unpack this. Riker's foundational argument relies on a concept that he calls the raw deal.
Right, raw deal.
Which essentially claims that historical institutions, so things built by male drive, have undergone a hostile takeover.
Yeah, by feminist and Marxist ideologies. And I think the term hostile takeover is the perfect mechanism to understand his thesis here.
How so?
Well, think about the corporate world. A hostile takeover involves replacing the original board of directors and completely altering the fundamental mission of the company.
Right.
Riker argues that modern institutions, so family courts, corporate HR departments, the education system, they've all undergone this exact process.
He labels them gynocentric institutions. Right.
Exactly. In his framework, these systems no longer operate on the principles of merit or biological reality that supposedly built them in the first place.
Right, so what do they operate on now?
According to him, their primary systemic function is to pathologize natural male behavior.
Pathologize it, meaning treat it like a disease.
Right, treat it like a disease while simultaneously extracting male resources to fund the system itself.
So he literally views men in the modern era as disposable ATMs.
KTMs and emotional punching bags, those are his words.
Wow. Okay, so let's look at the specific mechanics of how he claims this pathologizing happens, because he gives some very visceral examples in the book.
He does. The first one that really stands out is the story of a father named Mike.
Right, Mike navigating the family court system.
So Mike ends up losing all physical custody of his children.
And the justification provided to the court is just wild.
Yeah. His ex-wife claimed that he made their toddler anxious by aggressively teaching him how to throw a football.
A football.
Right. And according to Riker, the court accepted this framing entirely. They used it to remove the father from the home.
But Riker uses that anecdote, not just to, like, generate sympathy, right? He uses it to illustrate a structural mechanism.
Exactly. He pairs that story with data he pulled from the UK Ministry of Justice.
And the data claims what? That 90% of custody cases default to mothers.
Yeah, 90%. And he argues this happens regardless of parental fitness or financial capability.
So Riker is saying that the court system inherently views normal, active, physical, male play like just throwing a football through a lens of perceived threat,
Right. The institution frames masculine energy as inherently dangerous.
which then justifies the legal removal of the father.
And crucially, the subsequent financial extraction required to maintain the mother's household.
Wow. Okay, so he applies this exact same lens of institutional capture to the corporate world too, right?
He does, yeah. Specifically looking at how language is weaponized in human resources.
He cites this 2023 internal review from Goldman Sachs.
Right, the Goldman Sachs data. So, according to Riker's reading of this data, male analysts were routinely being flagged by HR.
Penalized in performance reviews for being, quote, domineering.
Domineering. And their offense. Their offense was simply insisting on strict data accuracy during meetings.
But meanwhile, and this is the kicker, female vice presidents exhibiting the exact same assertive behavior
Insisting on the exact same data accuracy.
who were formally praised.
Yes. They were documented as being thorough.
Thorough versus domineering, so it's the identical action.
Identical. But the institution's software processes it completely differently depending on the gender of the employee.
So the mechanism there is just subjective linguistic framing.
Exactly. Riker points out that HR departments possess the power to define the corporate lexicon.
Right, they own the dictionary.
Yeah. If male assertiveness is codified as domineering, it becomes a fireable offense. But if female assertiveness is codified as thorough, it becomes a promotion track.
And he extends this to academia as well, doesn't he?
He does. He points to Durham University, citing evidence that male students were scoring 17% lower on essays that questioned feminist sociological ideas.
Even when the structural quality of the writing was identical to their female peers.
Exactly the same quality, 17% penalty.
So the overarching picture he is painting of modern society, it's almost like a rigged casino.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
You walk in, the lights are flashing, society tells you, if you work hard, anyone can win the game.
But the pit bosses have rigged the rules.
Right. You put your chips on the table, you bring your natural competitiveness and your drive, the very traits that make you want to participate in the first place. And those exact traits are criminalized.
You're penalized simply for existing as you are.
And that casino metaphor directly ties into Riker's economic theory, doesn't it? What he calls the estrogen economy.
Yes, the estrogen economy. So Riker posits that modern consumer capitalism is functionally dependent on male disposability.
Which is a heavy claim.
It is. He cites data showing that men pay roughly 72% of wedding costs.
So they're basically funding a $500 billion global industry.
Right, and then he points to the $20 billion cosmetic surgery industry.
So the economic mechanism he's describing here is one where this systemic extraction of male wealth acts as the primary engine for female consumerism.
Exactly. In his view, the system fundamentally requires men to overproduce and then forfeit those resources so that this specific consumer economy can thrive.
Okay, so if we follow his logic here, and we just accept his premise for a second that this institutional capture is so pervasive.
The immediate question is, how did this happen?
Right. How does Riker justify the existence of such a massive systemic divide in how the genders operate?
Well, he doesn't look at recent political shifts or social media culture.
He bypasses culture entirely.
Entirely. He goes straight to evolutionary biology. He goes to our DNA.
What's fascinating here is how deeply he roots his arguments in evolutionary psychology.
He leans really heavily on the work of researchers like David Buss.
Right, the prominent evolutionary psychologist who studies human mating strategy.
Yeah. And Riker completely rejects the blank slate theory of human socialization.
He argues that the differences between men and women aren't the result of social conditioning or, patriarchal structures.
No, he says they are hardwired into our genetic code over millions of years of evolution.
Let's break down the data he uses to argue this, because he focuses intensely on digital dating metrics.
Yes, to prove that these ancient biological drives are still running the show today.
He brings up internal data from Tinder.
This part is wild. So according to Riker's sources, women on the app swipe right on just 4.5% of the male profiles they see.
4.5%.
Yeah. Meanwhile, men are swiping right on 60% of the female profiles.
60% versus 4.5. That is a stark mathematical divide.
And he uses that divide to illustrate a biological concept called hypergamy.
Hypergamy. Let's define that, because it's a crucial mechanism to understand Riker's philosophy.
So in evolutionary psychology, hypergamy is the theory that females of a species are biologically driven to seek mates of equal or higher social and resource status.
And the evolutionary logic there is that reproduction is incredibly costly for a female, right?
Exactly. Pregnancy, physical vulnerability, child rearing. It's a massive biological investment.
So she has to be ruthlessly selective to ensure her offspring have the resources to survive,
Right. Males, conversely, have a biologically cheap reproductive cost,
which leads to a strategy of widespread dissemination.
hence the 60% swipe rate on Tinder.
Wow. So Riker views dating apps not as some modern social aberration, but as like a digital campfire.
A digital campfire where these ancient, brutal mating algorithms are just playing out at light speed.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And he contrasts that female selectivity on dating apps with the raw physical reality of what he calls male disposability, right?
He does. He argues that society demands men be the ultimate shock absorbers for physical trauma.
He points to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah. Noting that 97% of the corpses on the battlefield are male.
97%.
Yeah.
And he looks at September 11th, highlighting that 341 of the 343 firefighters who died in the towers were men.
Right. And he pulls data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that 83% of all workplace fatalities are male.
So the point he's making with these mortality statistics is that society inherently values female life over male life when the chips are down.
Exactly. He argues that biological imperatives are the reason fire departments don't institute gender quotas when a skyscraper is collapsing.
Wow. So in Riker's view, the raw deal isn't just about losing custody or getting passed over for a promotion.
No, it is literally a matter of life and death. Society extracts the ultimate physical sacrifice from men to maintain civilization, but then intellectually dismisses that sacrifice by complaining about male privilege in air-conditioned boardrooms.
This brings us to a psychological trap that Riker calls the toxic masculinity double bond.
This is a really interesting concept.
According to his analysis, modern culture is constantly demanding emotional vulnerability from men.
Right, the prevailing narrative is that men need to open up, they need to share their feelings, shed traditional stoicism,
But Riker argues that this is a trap.
a complete setup. Because the moment a man actually demonstrates that vulnerability, the biological imperatives kick in.
And he is immediately punished or discarded by the very people who demanded he open up in the first place.
The examples he uses to illustrate this double bind are highly specific.
He discusses a social experiment on Tinder. Right?
Yeah, where male profiles explicitly admitted to struggling with anxiety in their bios.
And what happened?
Those profiles received 0 matches. 0.
Wow. And then he shares that anecdote about the guy who attempted to be emotionally available by crying in front of his partner.
Right, over the death of his childhood dog. A very understandable reason to cry.
And according to Riker, what does a partner do?
She ghosted him within the week.
Because her biological software registered his weeping as a signal of weakness.
Exactly. A signal of weakness and an inability to protect.
But the truly insidious part of this double bind is that the pendulum swings back the other way too.
Right. If a man refuses to be vulnerable and instead maintains traditional, quiet stoicism, he's also penalized.
He cites an alarming example regarding a Title IX hearing at Stanford University for this one.
Yes. A male student was allegedly expelled following an encounter.
And according to Riker's reading of the tribunal's findings, it was the student's stoic demeanor that doomed him.
His lack of emotional display was framed by the academic committee as implying a capacity for coercion.
So the double bind is complete.
Yep. If you express emotion, your biology betrays you, and you are discarded as weak.
But if you control your emotion, the institution flags you as a dangerous predator.
It's a lose-lose situation in his eyes.
I have to push back on the functional reality of this worldview, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if we accept Riker's premise that biology strictly dictates women will relentlessly seek resources and institutions are rigged to punish male nature no matter what a man does, isn't Riker essentially declaring that the fundamental social contract between men and women is entirely broken?
Yes.
I mean, it feels like ordering a steak at a restaurant because you crave the protein, but then prosecuting the cow in a court of law for existing.
That's a great way to put it.
If the game is this unwinnable, why should any man participate in standard societal structures at all?
That realization is precisely where Riker wants his reader to arrive.
Really?
Yes. He believes the traditional negotiation between the sexes has been utterly severed by modern jurisprudence and ideological shifts.
So in an ancestral environment, the dynamic was theoretically balanced, right?
Women gatekept sex and reproduction, while men gatekept commitment and resources.
But Riker argues that the modern legal stint has intervened.
It intervened to artificially force men to provide the resources even when the commitment is broken or the relationship dissolves.
So if the social contract is irreparably broken, then the most dangerous action a man could possibly take, according to Riker, is signing a binding legal contract with a woman.
Exactly. He views the institution of modern marriage as the ultimate trap.
He refers to it pretty aggressively as the marriage plantation.
Yeah, that terminology is very deliberately designed to evoke a sense of indentured servitude.
He describes the wedding ring as the ultimate DLC.
Right, downloadable content. It costs $500,000 but provides no actual ownership or security.
And in his framework, no-fault divorce laws have basically transformed the end of a marriage into an act of state-sponsored theft.
Let's look at the mechanics of this legal warfare, because the statistics he brings to the table are grim.
Yeah, they really are. He cites demographic data claiming that women initiate roughly 70 to 80% of all divorces.
Yet, despite being the initiating party, men routinely forfeit up to 90% of the accumulated marital assets during the proceedings.
And the psychological toll of this extraction is what Riker focuses on next, isn't it?
It is. He references CDC data indicating that divorced men commit suicide at a rate 10 times higher than divorced women.
10 times higher.
Yes. He paints a highly detailed picture of family courts operating essentially as modern debtor prisons.
Where fathers are presumed guilty of financial negligence until they are proven entirely destitute.
To ground these statistics in reality, he details a specific case out of Ohio.
Richards versus Richards.
Right. So in this case, a man earning a substantial salary, $200,000 a year, was ordered by the family court to pay his ex-wife $3,500 a month.
But Riker highlights the specific justification for this payment, which is key.
It wasn't for child support.
No?
And it wasn't for basic living alimony either.
The court ordered it specifically to maintain the ex-wife's standard of living, which included her expensive horse riding lessons.
Horse riding lessons. Riker dissects the legal mechanics of this, arguing that the state is using the threat of violence and imprisonment to enforce the funding of a former partner's hobbies.
Which brings us right back to the guy eating ramen noodles that we mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Right, the guy sending $4,000 a month to an ex-partner living on a beach in Bali.
Riker argues that this man's only real crime was marrying someone who claimed to believe in strict egalitarianism.
Right up until the moment a family court judge offered her the opportunity to liquidate his future earnings.
Exactly. And Riker organizes the mechanics of this legal extraction into a conceptual framework he calls the 3 F's of female supremacy.
The first pillar is finances.
Which covers the alimony structures we just discussed.
Right, where the state enforces the transfer of wealth long after the relationship has ceased.
The second pillar is fatherlessness.
This refers to the legal default of granting maternal custody, which physically isolates men from their children.
And Riker argues this isn't just an ideological preference, right?
No, he says it's a lucrative industry. The divorce apparatus, so lawyers, mediators, child support enforcement agencies, they all profit immensely from the sustained conflict of broken homes.
Wow. Okay, and the third pillar is fabrication.
This is where Riker delves into the weaponization of the criminal justice system through false allegations.
He argues that modern institutions process accusations against men with the exact same unverified speed as a viral social media post.
The burden of proof is effectively reversed. The accusation itself is the conviction.
And the resulting reputational damage is instantaneous and permanent.
He backs this up with some very high-profile case studies regarding the mechanics of reputational destruction.
Like the Brian Banks case.
Yeah. He details the tragic case of Brian Banks, who was a high school football phenom.
He lost a guaranteed path to the NFL and spent 5 years in a maximum security prison.
All because a classmate fabricated a rape claim to avoid getting in trouble for her own consensual behavior.
And he dissects the infamous Rolling Stone fake rape article at the University of Virginia, too.
Right, illustrating how a major journalistic institution abandoned all editorial standards to push a narrative that ruined innocent lives.
He also analyzes the Duke lacrosse team scandal,
showing how the media and ambitious prosecutors happily crucified young men despite DNA evidence proving their absolute innocence.
So Riker's central thesis here is that in a gynocentric system, A man's reputation is viewed as entirely disposable.
And his physical freedom is highly negotiable.
I really want you, listening right now, to pause and consider the sheer magnitude of what Riker is asserting here.
It's massive.
He is claiming that the entire legal apparatus of the family court system, corporate HR, university tribunals, and the criminal justice system regarding assault all operates as a coordinated meat grinder.
A meat grinder designed to consume male lives and output resources.
So if you accept his premise that the courts, the media, and the culture are fundamentally aligned against you, how does a man possibly survive?
How do you even wake up and walk out the front door, right?
Exactly.
Well, that question represents the absolute pivot point of the entire book.
Because Riker's proposed solution to this overwhelming systemic hostility is not political.
No, he actively mocks men who believe they can lobby their way out of this or protest to change the laws.
He argues that you cannot change the programming of a hostile environment.
Therefore, the only logical solution is entirely internal.
You must physically and neurologically forge yourself into a weapon capable of surviving the environment.
And here is where it gets incredibly technical. This brings us to his concept of neuroforging.
Specifically what he calls cold showers and frog consumption.
Yeah, he outlines a practice he terms combat physiology.
So the foundational premise of combat physiology is that modern society has drugged man into a state of compliance through excessive comfort.
Exactly.
Right.
Lukewarm affirmations, central heating, endless talk therapy. He says these have overridden our biological resilience.
So to reactivate the primal survival drive, Riker advocates for subjecting the body to extreme controlled physical discomfort.
To manually reset the nervous system.
He starts with extreme cold exposure, and he brings a significant amount of biological data to back up the mechanism of how this works.
He explains that standing under freezing water triggers a massive response in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
So after a month of consistent cold exposure, baseline levels of cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone that causes chronic anxiety, they drop by 23%.
Simultaneously, the shock of the cold boosts norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter linked to focus and attention, by 530%.
530%. And after just 20 minutes of exposure, testosterone surges by 300%.
He contextualizes this neurochemistry with a very personal anecdote, actually.
Oh, right, the Toronto snowbank story.
Yeah, he describes standing outside in a Toronto snowbank in just shorts during the most brutal, litigious winter of his divorce.
No, while his ex-wife's attorney was billing $750 an hour to legally dismantle his life.
Riker was using the freezing temperatures to force his amygdala, the fear center of the brain, to shut down panic.
And replace it with intense, cold, laser-like focus.
He views the cold as a crucible that just burns away emotional reactivity.
This leads to his fierce critique of modern psychological therapy, doesn't it? He believes it's actually neurologically harmful to men.
He does. He argues that male psychology evolved to process stress through physical action and problem solving.
Not through vocalizing vulnerabilities.
Right. He cites a psychological study evaluating vulnerability and debriefing training that was implemented for first responders.
And the data suggested that forcing firefighters to sit in circles and verbally relive trauma actually increased the incidence of anxiety disorders by 17%.
Compared to those who simply went back to work.
He uses the story of Morning Mike, a captain in the New York Fire Department, to drive this home.
Poor Morning Mike.
Yeah. So Mike was mandated to attend a trauma circle after a bad call. And he bought into the process, right?
He did. He opened up and wept in front of his crew.
But according to Riker, the empathy he was promised never materialized.
Instead, he was quietly labeled Morning Mike by the department. His authority evaporated.
And his expected promotion was stalled for 3 years.
Riker contrasts that therapeutic disaster with the methodology of the Navy SEALs.
Specifically the 40% rule.
So the 40% rule is the physiological concept that when your brain starts screaming at you that you are entirely exhausted and must quit, you have actually only depleted about 40% of your physical capacity.
The brain is lying to you to preserve energy.
Exactly. Riker argues that you don't conquer the grueling physical and mental torture of Hell Week by sitting down and sharing your feelings about the cold ocean.
You conquer it by learning to mentally choke out your own perceived weakness.
And force the body to keep moving.
I am struggling with the mechanics of his next protocol, though.
The frog consumption.
Yes, frog consumption. It's a metaphor for desensitizing your fear through controlled daily exposure. Eating the frog first thing in the morning.
Right.
He outlines this highly specific, combat-tested 3-phase protocol for overcoming things like approach anxiety.
Which is the paralyzing fear men often feel when trying to walk up and talk to a woman.
I understand the theory of interrupting fear, but how does eating dark chocolate actually override a panic attack? Break down this 3-phase protocol for us.
Okay, so it is essentially a process of applied biohacking mixed with behavioral conditioning.
Yeah.
Phase 1 requires the man to clinically identify his physical sabotage symptoms.
Right.
When a man experiences intense fear, the sympathetic nervous system triggers the fight or flight response. The heart races, palms sweat, the voice cracks, the mind goes blank.
Sure.
Riker insists that a man must stop viewing these as emotional failures and start viewing them clinically as mere biological alerts.
You have to recognize the physiological data your body is outputting.
Exactly.
Okay, so you identify that your hands are shaking. What is phase 2?
Phase 2 involves overriding those symptoms with conscious physiological interrupts.
Because you can't just think your way out of a panic response.
Right, the amygdala works faster than the prefrontal cortex. You have to use the body to hack the brain.
And how do you do that?
This involves utilizing tactical box breathing, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, to manually force the vagus nerve to lower the heart rate.
Okay, breathing techniques.
It also involves adopting expansive power poses to decrease cortisol and trick the brain into adopting a dominant posture.
Which chemically alters confidence levels.
Yes.
And phase 3 is where the chocolate comes in.
Yes. Phase 3 is about actively rewiring the neural pathways through reward conditioning. Riker calls it the dark chocolate dopamine hack.
Okay, walk me through that.
He details a case study of a client whose approach anxiety was so severe he would literally vomit from the adrenaline dump before trying to speak to a woman.
Wow. Climbing.
So Riker instructed him to carry a bar of extra dark chocolate, which contains compounds that naturally boost dopamine levels.
Right.
Every single time the client felt his handshake while reaching for a door to enter a social venue, he was instructed to take a bite of the chocolate.
So he is manually linking the trigger for fear directly to a chemical reward.
Precisely. Through neuroplasticity, the brain began to physically rewire itself. The mesolimbic pathway, the reward center, started firing simultaneously with the amygdala's fear response.
That's incredible.
Within weeks, the client's brain connected the acute stress of approaching a woman with a massive anticipated dopamine hit.
So he completely stopped fearing the interaction.
His biology had been reprogrammed to crave the stress as a precursor to reward.
That is a radical departure from standard psychological advice.
It really is.
To use an analogy, it's like dealing with a software glitch on a computer. Standard therapy wants to open up the code, analyze the history of the operating system, and figure out why the error message keeps popping up.
Right.
But Riker is essentially saying, the software is incompatible with this hostile environment. Don't analyze it. Just install a hard-coded patch that overrides the error message entirely.
You bypass the psychology and biologically override the fear with tactical breathing and dopamine.
It is a radically mechanistic, almost cybernetic view of the human nervous system.
He views the male body and brain as hardware that can be continuously reprogrammed if you apply the correct sequence of stress and chemical rewards.
However, mastering your internal fear is only the prerequisite. Right?
Yeah. Once a man has conquered his internal landscape and built that psychological armor, Riker dictates that he must turn his attention outward.
He must take the hatred, the criticism, and the hostility the world throws at him and forge it into a financial weapon.
That transition leads us right into his strategies for media warfare and feedback rockets.
This is where Riker lays out a highly pragmatic blueprint for monetizing outrage.
Which is such a modern concept, but he does it so clinically. Riker understands the algorithmic dynamics of the digital age intimately.
He knows that publicly challenging the prevailing gynocentric narrative will inevitably result in massive, coordinated vitriolic backlash.
But rather than retreating or issuing apologies, which he views as submission, he advocates leaning entirely into the chaos.
He shares a deeply personal story regarding his debut book here.
Yeah. Upon release, a prominent critic gave it a vicious 1-star review, publicly dismissing his years of research as pseudoscientific drivel.
Most authors would try to bury that review or get depressed.
Or argue with the person online.
Right. But Riker printed the review out in massive font and taped it directly above his computer monitor.
Leaving it there for 93 days.
93 days staring at it.
He used the hostility as literal alchemical fuel for his 4 a.m. writing sessions. He channeled the anger generated by that insult into his work.
And what was the result of that?
The result was a subsequent chapter on male suicide prevention that was so aggressively researched, so dense with undeniable statistical data, that it ended up being formally cited in a United States Senate subcommittee hearing on mental health.
He didn't ignore the troll. He weaponized the troll's energy to elevate his own status.
Exactly.
But he takes this concept of asymmetric media warfare much further than just personal motivation, doesn't he?
He does. He actively seeks to dismantle the scientific credibility of his critics using their own academic tactics against them.
There's an incredible story in the book where a prominent feminist academic published an article accusing Riker and his followers of suffering from fragile masculinity.
Right, and most public figures would engage in a fruitless Twitter argument over that accusation.
But Riker, instead, quietly funded a double-blind clinical study.
He paid a private lab to test the hormone profiles of 200 men.
Which is just the logistics of executing that just to win an argument are staggering.
It's next level petty, but brilliant. Half of the cohort were men who actively criticized him online, and the other half were his staunch supporters.
So what were the results of this study?
According to the data Riker published, the men who spent their time criticizing him online had baseline testosterone levels that were 18% lower than his supporters.
Wow, 18%.
Yeah. He didn't write an angry rebuttal. He simply published the clinical endocrinology data and publicly thanked the academic for inspiring the research.
It is a masterful, deeply cynical execution of algorithmic warfare.
You don't argue with your enemies, you scientifically dissect them for content.
This ties directly into his broader point about how modern men can completely bypass legacy media institutions,
He points out the collapsing viewership of traditional networks.
noting that primetime anchors on networks like MSNBC have seen their audience demographics age out and their numbers drop by millions over just a few short years.
Meanwhile, he points to the mechanics of decentralization.
He looks at accounts like Libs of TikTok, explaining how a single individual sitting at a laptop grew an audience of 2.3 million followers simply by utilizing meme speed.
Meme speed. Just reposting publicly available videos of activists to highlight their absurdities.
So Riker's underlying thesis here is that institutional gatekeepers no longer possess the keys to the kingdom.
You do not need a massive public relations firm, and you certainly don't need the approval of traditional publishing houses or television networks.
You need decentralized platforms like Substack and Rumble.
But most importantly, you need the psychological fortitude to turn cancel culture into a revenue stream.
He writes with immense pride about the time a major fashion magazine labeled him the Andrew Tate of academia.
The activist writer fully intended to destroy his career with that label,
But instead, Riker embraced the title.
which resulted in his Amazon book rankings skyrocketing by 2,000% in 48 hours.
When the system tries to cancel you, he argues, you simply send them an invoice.
Exactly.
I really have to ask you, the listener, to process the implications of this strategy.
It's a huge paradigm shift,
We live in an era where reputational destruction is literally one click away, right?
where an out-of-context quote or a viral accusation can vaporize a decade-long career overnight.
So in that specific environment, is leaning into the controversy, becoming utterly anti-fragile, and monetizing the hatred the only viable defense mechanism a man has left?
That's the question he poses.
If the mob is going to hate you, regardless of what you do, shouldn't you at least ensure you are getting paid for the engagement?
That is the exact brand of pragmatic ruthlessness that defines Riker's philosophy.
However, he introduces a crucial caveat to this entire strategy.
He is very quick to remind his readers that a media presence, going viral, winning ideological arguments online, these are all inherently digital phenomena.
And digital things are ghosts.
Right. They are fleeting, vulnerable to algorithmic shifts and platform deplatforming.
Real power, the kind of power that actually insulates a man from the hostile legal and cultural systems we discussed earlier, must be tangible, physical, and deeply financial.
You can't live inside a viral tweet.
And a high follower count won't pay for your legal defense in family court,
This brings us to his blueprint for financial invulnerability.
which he calls the unbreakable citadel in the practice of crisis forging.
Riker absolutely despises the modern, flashy interpretation of wealth,
He argues that wealth is not about purchasing luxury cars to flex on Instagram.
which he views as a pathetic plea for female validation.
Wealth, in his architecture, is a weapon.
It is the heavy armor plate that protects you from the extractions of the estrogen economy.
He views the mathematical reality of compound interest as a slow, inevitable form of payback against a system that wants you broke.
He illustrates this by comparing two different financial approaches to modern relationships.
He contrasts a man who quietly buys Vanguard index funds, allowing his capital to multiply silently over decades,
With a man who bows to societal pressure and blows $30,000 on a diamond engagement ring.
And Riker notes the bitter irony when, 18 months later, the fiancée decides she needs to find herself
Breaks off the engagement.
and legally pawns that $30,000 ring for a tiny fraction of its original cost.
The index fund buys freedom. The diamond ring buys a temporary illusion.
Because of this, Riker is fanatically obsessed with tangible assets over digital wealth.
He advises his readers to institute a strict rule.
Take 30% of your net earnings and sink it entirely into physical, touchable commodities.
He advocates for purchasing raw land, securing water rights, and hoarding precious metals.
He argues that digital wealth, whether it's money sitting in a bank account subject to freezing or cryptocurrency, can evaporate instantly.
He warns that when the power grid inevitably fails, or the banking system locks up, a crypto wallet will not heat a can of beans.
But an acre of timberland with a natural freshwater spring represents forever equity.
But the most intense, almost predatory aspect of his financial philosophy is what he calls crisis forging.
Riker does not just prepare to survive global chaos.
No, he actively maps out logistical strategies to capitalize on it.
He views global disasters, catastrophic supply chain failures, and market crashes not as tragedies.
But as massive, predictable transfers of wealth just waiting to be harvested by the prepared, emotionally detached man.
To understand the sheer scale of how he operates, we have to look at the logistical mechanics of the case studies he provides.
Take the Suez Canal blockage in 2021.
Oh man, when the ever-giving cargo ship wedged itself into the canal.
Right, the global supply chain instantly seized up in a panic.
Most businesses just froze, waiting for authorities to solve the problem.
But Riker saw an immediate bleeding pressure point. He realized that major footwear brands were about to miss crucial delivery windows.
So what did he do? He didn't wait?
No. He immediately mobilized capital and leased 23 Soviet-era cargo planes.
Soviet-era cargo planes. To do what?
To airlift massive shipments of sneakers out of manufacturing hubs in Indonesia.
So the logistical cost to him of using air freight instead of ocean freight must have quadrupled his baseline expenses.
It did, but it didn't matter.
Because he possessed the only viable supply line.
Exactly. So he turned around and charged Nike and other retailers a 900% premium to restock their shelves at Foot Locker right before the crucial holiday rush.
He used the global panic as leverage to name his own price.
He executed an even more complex maneuver regarding rare earth metals in Vietnam.
Let's hear this one.
So when the Chinese government abruptly halted the export of certain rare earth metals, the global tech industry was terrified.
Supply lines for electric vehicles and smartphones were basically paralyzed.
Right. And while tech CEOs were lobbying politicians, Riker's team quietly flew into Vietnam.
And they purchased 78% of the country's discarded smartphone recycling slag.
Literal mountains of toxic electronic garbage, old circuit boards, and crushed soda cans sitting in landfills.
He bought garbage, but why?
Because he understood the chemistry of what was inside that garbage.
Okay.
That specific slag heap contained enough trace neodymium, which is a rare earth metal critical for manufacturing high-performance magnets, to build 12 million electric motors.
12 million?
Yeah. He set up an extraction facility, pulled the neodymium out of the trash, and then turned around and sold the raw material back into the Chinese supply chain at a 90 times markup.
90 times markup. It is the absolute definition of ruthless, unapologetic capitalism.
It operates exactly like a master of judo.
A judo practitioner doesn't try to stop a heavier opponent's momentum using brute force.
Right, he takes that massive momentum, or in Riker's case, global supply chain ruptures and international trade panics, and effortlessly flips the opponent onto the mat.
You do not resist the chaos of the world. You strap a saddle to it and ride it to the bank.
Riker applies the same cold, detached logic to domestic stock market crashes, too.
He details his actions during the 2008 financial crisis, doesn't he?
He does. While the rest of the country was panicking, losing their homes, panic selling their portfolios, Riker was hunting for industries that possessed absolute inelastic demand.
And he realized that regardless of the economy, people still die.
So he began buying up independent, family-owned funeral homes that were being crushed by variable interest rate debt.
He bought them out in cash for pennies on the dollar.
And then he applied his operational leverage to them.
Right.
He ruthlessly slashed their overhead.
He cut their labor expenses by 60% by outsourcing the complex embalming work across the border to facilities in Mexico.
And he replaced the high-pressure sales staff with self-service digital kiosks where grieving families could select caskets on a touchscreen.
So while other investors bled out in the housing market, Riker was quietly gathering bodies and turning grief into high-yield bonds.
It is an incredibly dark methodology, but within the framework he has built, it is undeniably effective.
It does, however, raise a massive existential question about the ultimate purpose of this philosophy.
It really does.
If a man follows Riker's blueprint perfectly, if he isolates himself emotionally, trusts absolutely no one, views the legal system as a trap, avoids marriage entirely, and treats all of society as a hostile extraction machine, what is the end game?
Right. Is the ultimate victory just sitting completely alone inside a fortified physical citadel, taking freezing cold showers next to a stack of gold bars?
That is the exact existential void that Riker attempts to address in the final section of the book, which deals with tribal resurrection and casting immortality.
Riker acknowledges that total isolation is lethal to the human primate.
So his solution to surviving a hostile society isn't to become a lone wolf.
His solution is to actively secede from the mainstream culture and meticulously rebuild a localized tribe.
And specifically, he mandates that these must be fiercely protected, male-only spaces.
He grounds this necessity in anthropological data. He cites a comprehensive study from UCLA anthropologists examining the behavioral patterns of our hunter-gatherer ancestors.
The data shows that ancestral males spent roughly 72% of their waking hours exclusively in the company of other men.
Hunting, strategizing, building shelters, transferring skills.
Today, Riker argues, the average modern man's primary interaction with his own gender is offering a silent nod to a stranger at the gym while wearing noise-canceling headphones.
He argues that this profound lack of brotherhood and shared purpose is literally killing men.
He cites data from the World Health Organization indicating that men who lack a tight network of close male friends suffer from elevated cortisol levels, higher rates of heart disease, and die significantly younger than men who maintain a tribe.
So, to combat this biological decay, Riker advocates for building an inner circle, but he insists on an intensely rigorous vetting process.
You do not just let anyone into the Citadel.
No. He describes his own process for interviewing men who want to join his business network.
He recounts immediately cutting a highly successful executive during their first beer.
Simply because the man spent 20 minutes complaining about his nagging wife.
Riker views a victim mentality and an inability to manage one's own household as a contagious pathogen.
A pathogen that will eventually infect the rest of the group.
He cut another applicant simply for using the phrase toxic masculinity in a serious context.
Viewing it as evidence of ideological brainwashing.
But the anecdote that truly highlights his vetting criteria involves a divorced blue-collar electrician.
Oh, this guy. Riker brought this guy into the inner circle immediately.
Why?
Because the electrician had figured out a legal loophole to pay his court-ordered alimony using highly volatile Bitcoin.
Wait, how did that work?
He would time his transfers to coincide with massive market crashes, ensuring that by the time the ex-wife's lawyers processed the payment, she took a massive haircut on the actual fiat value of the transfer.
Wow. So Riker doesn't care about polite society. He values strategic, rogue, anti-fragile thinking.
He is attempting to construct a localized fortress of extreme competence.
He juxtaposes the civilizational necessity of this male tribe with what he views as the historical stagnation of matriarchal societies.
He uses the Masuo tribe, an ethnic group in China, as his primary case study here.
Modern sociologists often tout the Masuo as a peaceful feminist utopia because women inherit all property and men hold zero formal political power.
But Riker looks at that exact same society and points out a glaring issue.
The Masuo have experienced effectively zero technological or infrastructural advancement in 2,000 years.
They're still living in the exact same wooden structures.
And he fiercely contrasts that multimillennial stagnation with a hyper-patriarchal, male-driven society like South Korea.
Right. After the devastation of the Korean War, male-led industrial conglomerates took South Korea from a starving nation of rice paddies to a society dominating the global semiconductor and robotics markets in just 2 generations.
Riker argues that the biological mechanism driving this disparity is testosterone.
In his view, testosterone is not the poison that causes wars.
It is the vital fuel that drives risk-taking, infrastructural expansion, and an absolute obsession with legacy.
He believes that the male biological imperative to conquer the environment is what actually builds civilization.
Which brings us to his final overarching concept, casting immortality.
This is the mandate that a man must leave a permanent physical mark on the world.
This circles back to his absolute disdain for the digital world.
Riker believes that digital footprints, your viral tweets, your YouTube subscribers, even the digital numbers in your bank account, are ultimately meaningless ghosts.
They are vulnerable to a single server wipe or a change in an algorithm.
True legacy, driven by male biology, must be forged and carved into the physical world.
He illustrates this with a surprisingly poignant, almost tragic story about a man named Mike, a 58-year-old auto worker from Detroit.
Yeah, for years, Mike had fallen into the trap of digital warfare.
He spent 4 hours a night sitting in the glow of his computer screen, arguing politics on Facebook.
Battling anonymous trolls, getting angrier and more alienated from his family every single day.
And the turning point came when his teenage daughter looked at him and asked, "Dad, when you're gone, what real thing will actually prove you existed?"
That question completely shattered the illusion of the digital matrix for him.
Mike realized his entire output as a man was just angry electrical signals on a server in California.
So he immediately logged off, permanently.
He went out into his freezing garage, turned on his lathe, and started working with steel.
He began creating highly specialized custom wrench sets for classic car restorations.
Today, those physical heavy steel wrenches are mounted on the walls of garages across 17 different states.
That is Riker's ultimate definition of immortality. It isn't found in the cloud or in a retweet.
It is found in the sweat on a chisel, the grain of a custom workbench, the concrete poured for a foundation.
He commands his readers. Real immortality isn't in servers. Go pour concrete.
It is a visceral call to abandon the artificial squabbles of the internet and return to the physical world to build monuments, businesses, and artifacts that will outlast the political and cultural arguments of the current era.
I do have to point out a massive glaring contradiction in his methodology here, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Riker is vehemently preaching to men that digital ghosts are pointless, that the internet is a trap, and that true legacy must be physical.
And yet, he is using a digital ebook, Substack newsletters, and algorithmic YouTube outrage to spread this exact message.
He is utilizing the very matrix he claims to despise to build his own empire.
It is an undeniable contradiction. If pressed, Riker would likely frame it as tactical hypocrisy.
His argument would be that you have to use the sophisticated tools of the digital age to reach men where they are currently trapped.
In order to wake them up so they can finally log off and go build the physical world. So what does this all mean for us? We have gone on an incredibly visceral, exhaustive journey today through the architecture of Riker's worldview.
We started by examining his premise of systemic capture, the idea that modern institutions are rigged as hostile takeovers designed to extract male resources while pathologizing natural male behavior.
We look deeply into the evolutionary psychology and the biological mechanisms of hypergamy that he uses to justify his view of gender dynamics.
We unpacked the grim mechanics of the marriage plantation and the weaponization of the family court system.
We explored his radical physiological solutions, neuroforging through extreme cold exposure, overriding the amygdala, and rewiring dopamine responses to conquer fear.
We analyzed his blueprint for asymmetric media warfare and monetizing outrage.
We looked at the sheer logistical ruthlessness of building financial fortresses by capitalizing on global supply chain chaos.
And finally, we discussed his ultimate mandate to resurrect vetted male tribes and pour concrete to build a lasting physical legacy.
It is a comprehensive, unapologetically brutal operating system designed for surviving what he views as an inherently hostile world.
And we want to reiterate one final time. Our role on this deep dive was not to validate Riker's highly controversial claims, nor to debunk them.
Our objective was to meticulously lay out the blueprint of this ideology so that you can clearly understand the deep biological and economic arguments currently fueling the men's rights movement.
Absolutely.
If this exploration challenged your perspective, sparked your curiosity, or just made you want to dive into the source material to analyze it for yourself, please remember to like and subscribe to the deep dive.
And again, you should definitely search Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book Post-Traumatic Growth, Walk Through Hell and Out the Other Side.
You can also follow at Conrad and Riker on Substack to observe how these specific strategies are being deployed in real time.
It is a philosophy that fundamentally demands you engage with it, one way or the other.
It really does. I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
This is something he hits on hard at the end.
Riker claims repeatedly throughout this text that comfort is the ultimate enemy.
He argues that society deliberately pacifies men by wrapping them in layers of frictionless convenience,
Slowly turning them into docile, compliant beasts of burden who forget how to fight.
If there is even a fraction of truth to that mechanism, look around at the conveniences surrounding you right now.
Look at your voice-activated smart home, your instant food delivery apps that bring calories to your door with zero effort.
Your endless algorithmic streams of passive entertainment.
Are these sophisticated tools actually optimizing your life and freeing up your time so you can build a lasting legacy?
Or are they just the incredibly soft, comfortable padding of a cage that you didn't even realize you were building for yourself?
Think about it. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.